Hey guys, so in this video, let's learn about the Kubernetes extension for VSCode. So whether you are a developer developing applications targeting Kubernetes or you're a DevOps person who tries to who is managing the Kubernetes, this extension should help you to stay productive. So before we get started on getting deeper into the demo, so let's have a quick introduction about myself. So my name is Swaminathan Vetri. So I work as an architect at Maersk. Currently working on cloud native applications building on Azure using Azure PaaS services, microservices architecture, Docker, Kubernetes, etc. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP and the developer technologies. So I'm a member of .NET Foundation, and I run a couple of meetups in Bangalore called B.NET, X-Hackers in Bangalore Azure meetup. And I also write some technical blogs at swaminathanvetri.in. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/swaminathanvetri. So if in case you've not subscribed to it, please go ahead and subscribe. So you might find this useful. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle, @SVSwaminathan. Alright, so with that quick introduction about myself, let's get into the session. Yeah, so first thing first, right? So first let's understand how we can install this extension. So you can go to this extension window here, and then when you search for Kubernetes, what you see is going to be this particular extension, like develop, deploy, and debug Kubernetes applications, and this is from Microsoft. So this is what we are going to check out today. So I have this already installed, so it just shows the uninstall the disable button. So once you have this installed in your machine, so you'll get this particular navigation item here for Kubernetes. And that's going to give you three different options. So one, you can go ahead and check out your clusters, and this also has a good addition to the Helm repo. So if at all you're working with Helm charts and everything for deployments, you can use that. And this also works with multiple clouds, whether be it an Azure, AWS, or GCP, wherever you have your Kubernetes running, you can connect to that. So for now, we're just going to look at the clusters in this particular session. So these are different clusters which I've configured in my in my kubeconfig file basically. So I do have Docker desktop installed in my machine, and I have Kubernetes running there. So that's this instance. And I also have a Minikube installed in my machine. So that's what is showing up here. And this is another instance which I created in my Azure AKS. Right, so you get to see all the clusters, and this one is what is the currently active cluster. So as you can see, which is having this expander here. And when you open your current cluster, right, so okay, before we open that, so when you right click on this cluster, you can see all of these different options. So you can either open the dashboard or delete this cluster from the kube configuration, or you can also do a show cluster info. So when you click on show cluster info, all it is doing is just running this kubectl cluster info command. So basically this is more like a wrapper for you. Don't have to really remember a lot of commands in Kubernetes. Instead, you can play around with this extension to understand what each command is corresponding to. Alright, so getting back to here, right? So here you get to see all the different other options within your particular cluster. You can see the namespaces what are created under this cluster, and all the nodes which are running here. So in my case, these are the different nodes which are running, and you can also see the workloads. Under the workloads is where you get to see your deployments, your jobs, your cron jobs, your pods, etc., etc. So as of now, I don't have any deployments available, so it's just blank here, and pods also currently is blank. And if at all you want to monitor your services, Kubernetes services or endpoints or ingress, this is the place where you want to go and check it out. Right, under services, Kubernetes, ingress, and everything you'll see here. And the storage would give you the options about the persistent volumes and the volume claims, etc. And if all your config maps and the secrets go here, right? So as of now, it's all empty because I don't have anything here. Let's start building some of the things, and then we'll see how this helps us, right? So that's about the cluster. So if you want to change your cluster to a different one, you can also right click here and then say set as current cluster. And in this case, I don't have a Minikube running. So let me quickly check that status here. So Minikube status, it says stopped. So if I want to start it from here, I can definitely go here and then say start Minikube, and that should start the Minikube basically. And then if you want to deploy your applications to Minikube, you can just go ahead and click on that and then make it as a current cluster, and then that should do. So for this demo, I'm going to use the Docker desktop as my cluster. So yeah, just to check if this works, if I go to Minikube status, yeah, it says it's running. Yeah, so that's how you can play around with this cluster commands. So from the development perspective, right, so it also helps us in deploying the apps easily to Kubernetes. So for this demo, what I have is a basic .NET Core based application, which I've used in my previous video, where I use the Docker extension to build Docker images and then deploy the Docker images into the Docker for desktop running in my machine. So I'm going to extend the same application. So it has a Docker file mentioned here. So all it is doing is building this basic .NET Web API from this particular ASP.NET Core 3.1 application, and it's trying to run there. So just to quickly see what this application is doing, I'm going to say .NET run, and then it should basically run this application. It's a simple web API which is going to just give you. I just added a get host name to show from where it is going to run, so that when this is deployed into the Kubernetes, we'll know from which host it is really running, right? So let's see how we can use this extension to deploy this particular web API. So to do that, all you need to do is just press Ctrl+Shift+P and then type Kubernetes, and you should see a lot of options. So you can see Kubernetes run. So that's what I'm going to do now to run this Docker image into the Kubernetes, right? So typically you need to create your Kubernetes manifest and do a deployment and expose the service and everything, which we'll do later. For now, without even creating those manifests, let's take the help of this particular extension and let's run this image into the Kubernetes. Right, so I'm going to say Kubernetes run. So what it would do is it would try to build this application, and then it will try to push into my registry, right? So for this to work, you need to set up a particular setting. So if you go to settings in your VS Code and go search for Kubernetes, right? So you need to set this particular thing, VS Docker and image user, right? So this is where is my Docker repository name, wannabe geek. So I've just mentioned this here, so that whenever it is trying to push the image, it will go and push into this particular repository. All right, and I think you can see the statuses here. So it says deployment apps Docker extension demo created. So what I have in my right is a terminal. So I'm just going to run this command to see how these whatever the things we are doing in the extension, we can see how it is getting reflected in the kubectl there. So I'm saying kubectl get pods. Oops, okay, I'm running on WSL, so I just need to kubectl.exe. Okay, so it already says it's running a particular instance. This is my Docker extension demo. So now if you go back to the Kubernetes extension and expand your cluster, and just to refresh once to ensure that it is, oops, okay, it looks like it's set up here. So let me go here and then open the workload, open the deployments. You can see that there is a Docker extension demo is a deployment name. This is basically the project name, what it has by default considered it, and then it has created a pod here. If you can see, it's the same pod which is ending GKQ9Z. That's what is running up here, right? So now that's how it is run. So now how do we access this particular API, right? Again, we can take the help of this extension. So when you right click on this particular pod, these are the different options what you get for the pod, right? You can follow the logs, you can show the logs, you can describe the deployment basically if you want to. So when you say describe, it's going to describe the entire pod status here, right? And now if you say load, it's also going to give you the pods YAML, basically whatever the YAML file corresponding to that. So I'm going to close all of these, and then for us to see how this works, right, let's follow the logs to understand how you can track your application, or track the application logs, what's running from when it is running from within the Kubernetes. So I'm saying follow the logs. So this is what it is doing. So now to access this, you can use a port forward, and then you can say whichever the port in your local machine which you want to map to the one which is running in your container. So I'm mapping my local host port 5000 to the port 80 of the container. So when I say when I hit enter, so it is trying to forward the port. And now when I go back to my Explorer and still say this and refresh this, as you can see, right, so this it says now Docker extend demo blah 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 GKQ9Z. So if you go back to our to the pod, it's the same pod which it is running, right? So that means now we are able to run we were able to port forward the application which is running in a port 80 within the container is being forwarded to my local host port 5000, and we're able to access this. And every time you access that application, you could see that whenever I hit refresh, you can see the logs growing here, right? If you go to the VSCode, so this part, this is the part, is the tail part of the logs. So every time I hit a refresh here, you can see that it keeps growing. That means you can get the live logs from your application, which is running within the Kubernetes, right in front of you in the VSCode itself. All right. Now, okay, I was able to deploy my application, run it, and see it. Now, what if I want to scale my application? Right. Currently, if you see, it's running only one instance of my pod. Right. What if I want to run it to multiple instances? So when you go and right click on your deployment, you see the option for scale here. So when you say scale, it asks you how many replicas you want. And let's say, for example, I want to run for 4 replicas, and I say enter. The scale would get started, and you can see instantaneously that the number of pods are increased now. So now we have got 4 different pods. So those are the status container creating and everything, but eventually all of these would be run. So let's say if you want to check how your scaling works and everything, right, you don't have to really go ahead and remember all the commands to do it. You just right click and then do a scaling up, scaling down, both are possible here. So let me just give a second for all of them to run. Yeah, so now all of them are running. So if I go ahead and refresh my the extension here, you can see that different pod names are available here, right? So that's some more cool things about this extension, which we can use to scale up or scale down or whatever. Now let's say I'm going to scale down, so I'm going to bring it down to 1, and the moment I do it, immediately you can see that it starts terminating all the other things, and then there's only one instance which is running here, right? Yeah, so those are some of the things which you could do with this extension. And if you click on Ctrl+Shift+P and then say Kubernetes, it gives you a lot of different options. But what we did now is just run, and then we were trying to scale up and scale down using the extension itself. It also has a lot of other options. Debugging is possible for .NET, Java, Python apps. So debugging will be taken kind of separate session, because that needs a bit more setup and everything. Yeah, so other than that, you can also see a lot of different other things. So let's say if you want to run any kind of command on your container, right, you can very well do that too. So if you just go ahead, refresh, you right click and then say the terminal, so this would enable you into the particular container, right? So when you say ls, so this is where my entire app folder is, and that's where this is the contents of my particular application, web application, which is running here, right? The .NET extension DLL. So if I just go cd ... and then say ls, so this is where I'm querying the container which is running my particular application. So if you want to check out certain things, what kind of installations are available in the container or so on and so forth, you could very well do that with this particular option. So I'm going to cancel this port forwarding too, so that, yeah. So yeah, so you get a lot of other different options. So you can, like, we just saw about the following the logs, and then we did a port forward, and watch is nothing but whenever any change is happening on this particular resource, right, it will keep on refreshing it here. Yeah, so that's pretty much about how we can leverage the extension to directly run a Docker container, right? But now, what if I want to create the Kubernetes manifests? Right, so let's do that, right? So I'm going to create a new folder and say Kubernetes here, and within Kubernetes I'm going to create a deployment YAML file. Deployment YAML is the basic one which would help us in deploying a particular resource, right? So when I say deployment, it says Kubernetes deployment, and I'm telling enter. So it gives all the options, and all the mandatory elements in the YAML file are already pre-populated here. So I'm going to say Kubernetes Extension demo is my app name. And the image name is going to be wannabegeek / what was the name I had given? I believe it's Docker extn demo. That's a product name. And the container port, it is 80. So when I do that, and you get to add, if you want to add any other things, you can definitely go ahead and add it here. So for now, I'm good with this deployment YAML. So once I complete this, again, you press Ctrl+Shift+P and then say Kubernetes, and you get to see the apply command here. So when you say apply, so it will try to create this particular resource now. So it says resource deployment as an exists, and I'm going to say create. And yes, as soon as this deployment is created, you can see that a new pod came up here, right, with the name of Kubernetes Extension demo. Whatever we have now, the next option is to create a service for this one, correct? So that we can expose this, and then we can directly run it. service.yaml, and when I go to service, this is Kubernetes service, it says Kubernetes service, you get the IntelliSense for that, and then you can go ahead and create that. So Kubernetes extension service. On the app name, selector should be same as this particular app, so I'm going to say Kubernetes extension demo, and this port is going to be 8080 and target port is going to be 80. You also need to add the type here. Type is going to be load balancer, so that's when I'll be able to get an IP exposed for this particular thing, and then I'll be able to access this application using the 8080 port. Hopefully this is fine. So let me go ahead and create another another Ubuntu shell, and then say watch kubectl.exe get services. Right, so now as you can see, there's only one service. If it's too big to read, there's only one called Kubernetes. So I'm going to save this, and then say Kubernetes apply again, and this should create this entire service. I say create, it says created. Yeah, so it says it's ready. Right, Kubernetes extension service is what it is available. So hopefully now with this particular thing, I should be able to access the application using localhost colon 8080. Let's go quickly check that. I hope this works. I have not messed up anything, or did I? Okay, let me quickly go ahead and check here what's happening. Services, Kubernetes extension service got created. Oops, is it still creating? Okay, I got it. I think, yeah, that's a bad indentation here. Though I've specified this as load balancer here, as you can see, it doesn't cluster IP, so which is not what we expected. So I think it should be ideally here. So just for, so I'm going to delete this service and recreate again. Yeah, delete, and it's deleted. Let's say Kubernetes apply. Yeah, now it came up as load balancer, and I could see that the 8080 is mapped to this one. Okay, now let me quickly check if my localhost 8080 is gonna work or not. The status is still pending. I think it's still doing some work. It's not ready yet. Let's give this a few more seconds. Okay. Yeah, so I found the issue. So basically, earlier I was using a Minikube as my cluster, and where it doesn't really automatically as an ingress for my local host. So I kind of switched it to Docker Desktop for now, and then I've deployed both the YAML files using Kubernetes apply commands here. And here you can see that Kubernetes extension service is available, and it says the local host, it's the external IP. So now when I do a localhost colon 8080, right, it does serve the page from the pod. And if you go back here, you can see the pod name is 5db6k, and which is matching with this 5db6k here, right? So that's how basically you can use the extension to create these different manifest files as well. Yeah, so so just to quickly recap, right? So we started with understanding of how to install this extension, and then we triggered some of these cluster commands from the extension, and we also tried to deploy the apps using Kubernetes run command, and we did follow the logs by using the extension, and also we did port forwarding to see how the app works within Kubernetes, right? And finally we leveraged the Kubernetes extension its IntelliSense to create the deployment and service YAML files, and then deployed the app into this. Yeah, so I hope you found this useful. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to show today. And yeah, like I mentioned, the debugging part of this particular thing would be taken care of in a subsequent video, so please subscribe to the channel so that you'll be aware whenever the new video is published. Thank you.